to this session on discussion on buyers and sellers, partnering opportunities along the value chain, licensing and commercialization agreements, and geo-focus deals. I'm Debraj. I'm with Biocon Biologics, and it's my pleasure to welcome on board the three panelists that we have here. So let me introduce our panelists one by one. So first off, we have Shaoli Hu. Shaoli is Head of Business Development for Xbrane Biopharma AB. It's a Swedish biotech developing biosimilar products along its proprietary protein expression technology platform. Prior to joining Xbrane, she worked as a director of business development at Affibody AB, another clinical stage Swedish biotech, which she joined in 2017. And her responsibilities range from in-house pipeline strategy to commercial business development for research collaboration and commercial partnership with pharma partners across Europe and US. Welcome on board, Shaoli. Glad to have you here.
Thanks a lot.
Next up, we have Stefani Saverio. So Saverio is Senior Director of Business Development for Knight Therapeutics. He has a scientific background with a pharma degree and MBA from University of Sao Paulo. He's a very experienced healthcare professional with more than 20 years in large business and technical areas in big pharma like Merck, BMS, and Archie Laboratories in Brazil. He's currently been working as a Senior Director, Business Development at Knight Therapeutics, aiming to support the company in the exciting journey of creating a premier Pan-American specialty pharma company. Welcome on board, Saverio. And last but not the least, Bert, welcome. Bert is SVP Business Development Biothera Solutions. He's Senior Vice President with the company, which is, of course, as you all know, a China-based pharmaceutical company dedicated to developing innovative new therapies to fight some of the world's most challenging diseases. Prior to joining Biothera Solutions, Bert has a very illustrious career, and I won't go into it all because that will take up the 1 hour of time that we have. But I will ask Bert to give a bit more color and flavor when he comes on board and introduces himself. So with that, let's get into the session. So first off, Shaoli, why don't we start with you? If you can give a short introduction to yourself and Xbrane, and talk about some key learnings in terms of building a biosimilar pipeline to attract licensing partners. What has been your experience in this space so far?
Sure, very happy to do that. First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. I think probably I wouldn't go so much into introducing myself because I think the moderator, you have introduced it very extensively. One thing I do wanted to point out is that, so before I joined Xbrane Biopharma, I have actually a career past working in the innovative drug development. So Xbrane is actually a biosimilar, drug development company. So in that case, a little bit different from how my track record and career passes have been. And that actually allowed me to observe the differences between, what is needed for innovative drug development versus the biosimilar, what are the strengths and what are the risks. So I think that regarding myself, I will leave it with here. But Xbrane Biopharma is a very interesting company because it is a company which actually built from the core technology platform. We call that LEMO technology, which is less and more. So this is the technology that has been spun out from the Stockholm University and KTH. And around the platform technology, which is a lead technology, which actually allows the best and the most efficient protein expression and production, which means translating into the real world, it has significant higher yields when it comes to the E. coli, platform technology for protein expression. And needless to say, that allowed us to have a really high yields and low COGS. And this is very relevant for the biosimilar product development. And that is the reason why initially we decided to go into the biosimilar space, because building on our in-house strengths. So that is actually one of the lessons that, internally from the company that we have learned, what is actually really important in building an attractive pipeline. I mean, I dare not to say that the attractive pipeline that actually attract partners, because different partners actually different needs in terms of, what is useful. But what we have identified is that leveraging on the in-house, technology core strengths, it does give us a differentiation. So, and that really allow us to attract potential parties who are interested in the technology and wanted to go into the space. So we can very proudly say that because of that, we managed to actually secure our partnership with the STADA for our lead product. And by the time that we actually entered the collaboration with STADA, the product, which is a Lucentis biosimilar, it is only in very early clinical stage. So we started the dialogue in preclinical and moved all the way to the clinical. And this is quite unusual. I'm sure that you all know that most of the biosimilar players, I mean, they're mostly interested in late stage or market ready products. So I would say that, you know, the way how we see that, we think really building on the in-house strengths, leveraging what you can do and what you do good. I mean, that is something definitely important. And this is a positive lesson that we actually learned. And leveraging on that, we're building some additional products using the same E. coli manufacturing technology. And then at the same time, we also realized that, you know, moving forward more and more, that it's very important to actually develop maps. And for that, one needs mammalian cell lines. So this is a space, an area we're actually planning to set our foothold on. I wouldn't go so much into the pipelines, as this is not really a presentation about the X-Brain. But I think my point here, combining the introduction of X-Brain and what we have done in our deal collaboration side is really, you know, do what you do good, identify what is the differentiation points in terms of company and team competence. And we do believe that that does give us a competitive edge in that. So I think that this is one of the main lessons learned. I mean, of course, there are also other things which might not necessarily related to X-Brain, but it is what we have observed in the biosimilar field, is that more and more people started to talk about something called, you know, me better. So some slightly reform about the drug characteristics that potentially could give a better outcome of a same product. I don't think that I wanted to, you know, I'm going so much into this because I believe that my peer panelists would actually leverage more on that. But this is one of the thinkings that we have also, you know, discussed within the company, building extra competence beside the protein engineering and expression process development, maybe a little bit more on the device development, maybe a little bit more on the formulation. And, you know, this is something that I'm actually really happy to discuss with all of you and maybe together with the audiences. So I think with that, I would actually pause here and probably hear the same topic, you know, from the other fellow panelists. So yeah, I think with that, I will give the microphone back to the moderator.
Thank you, Shak. That's very helpful. Thank you. So, Bert, if I come to you next, because you are also coming more or less from the supplier side. You know, can you give a little bit of intro to yourself and Biothera Solutions, and what has been your key learnings on choosing a partner with pros and cons?
Sure. So I'm, you know, just the super quick about myself. I'm a PhD chemist by training, spent 10 years in small molecule drug discovery before moving into business development. Had a little left-hand turn into the nonprofit space, working for the American Association for Cancer Research, and then running a patient advocacy organization before coming back to the dark side, I guess you could say, and going back into pharma and back into business development to help run Biothera, which is has taken a very aggressive approach to being a monoclonal antibody company and looking to leverage in-house resources to both push a very aggressive, innovative pipeline in oncology and a very aggressive biosimilar pipeline, primarily in autoimmune. So it's a great company to work with, great people, and fun to have a lot of different assets to go out and talk to people about, because we definitely take a more shots on goal approach, which is a little rare in the US, but is fun to be part of. So But playing off of what Jolie was saying, the deal that they did with Stada, I think is an exceptional deal, and is rare doing it at the early stage. I think what I've seen in my close to 4 years in the biosimilar space is that uh, we find that most companies, most of the larger MNCs or mid tiers are, interested in what we're doing, but they don't get really interested until we get into phase 3. And so we need to have the capacity really to take our programs to the finish line. And by finish line, I mean getting through the global phase 3 development, and then being able to present to the various prospective partners an asset that's ready for regulatory filing and to come onto the market. And so we have occasional conversations that are earlier in the development stage, but for the most part, the serious conversations really start after we announce dosing in our phase 3. And we hope to have some announcements to share with the community over the next 6 or 9 months around partnerships around our pipeline. But it takes a long time. Larger companies are very diligent in going through all of the information, analytical, preclinical, your clinical development plan, your regulatory strategy, et cetera. So you really have to be very thorough in your preparation, and almost think of it as if you were an MNC and doing this in-house for them. So that's really what they're looking for: the same quality, the same depth of experiments and data. And so it's a very challenging process, because stakeholders want, you start talking to company A and they want to know, okay, when's the deal going to happen? And 6-12 months later, you're still going through a process, because these companies are very thorough and very detailed, even given that I almost think sometimes that because biosimilars are de-risked to a certain extent, that the level of diligence is actually more intense for biosimilars than it is for innovative compounds, because with an innovative program, there's just so many unknowns that you can't know about, and people get excited about targets and therapies. And with biosimilars, it's a very defined path. And so again, we don't see a lot of interest until we're into phase 3. They expect us to finish the phase 3 on our own, and then have the opportunity to work with us to commercialize the assets around the world. And so the thing that I love about working for Biothera is we've been able to raise the resources through investors, particularly in the Asian market, to be able to support planning to complete phase 3s for we have 8 public assets right now, and so that's it's a lot of resources that's required. And so I think it's a challenge. I think if you can't get into phase 3 and finish it, it makes it much more difficult for companies to get their hands around at this point. The other thing I'll just quickly comment on, because it's come up in some of our recent discussions, and I can't really go into a lot of detail, but as Jolie put it, the me better, looking for differentiators is actually a real phenomena. It's been very interesting. It's only come up in the last 6 months, really, in our discussions. People looking for different ways to differentiate on a product that's supposed to be exactly the same as the originator. And so there are definitely some regulatory questions that I still have in terms of how that's all going to play out, because a lot of folks are looking at different concentrations that maybe aren't approved for the reference product, as a way to start to differentiate, or different concentrations in vials, or so it's actually been very interesting to see how folks are really trying to find a way to differentiate their product in a space where everything's supposed to be exactly the same. So so with that, I'll turn it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Bert. No, very interesting. So, Bert, you spoke about some of the challenges in terms of finding a partner. Now, Stephanie, you're sitting on the other side, and you're looking at all of these opportunities. So, how do you see the world from where you are? Maybe you can start by giving a short introduction to yourself and Knight Therapeutics, what you do, and then strategic considerations that you have when looking for partners.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Deborah. Yeah, I'm the other side in looking at all of that and try to find also and participate in the decision of the best strategies. Just to give you a background in terms of from where my opinions and proposals are coming. I also have a technical background, as you mentioned, but I always worked in the dark side. I mean, always in marketing and business. In the last 12 years that I worked for one of the most innovative companies in Brazil, I was also heading the R&D teams, the technical, clinical, and drug discovery as well. So I have been also using some of my technicalities or scientific features, but in general, I have been always looking at the business aspects of everything. Recently, I moved to 6 months ago. I moved to Knight Therapeutics. Knight Therapeutics is a Canadian company, and is now very well positioned to be a partner of choice in the region, in a Pan-American region, because most of the companies are targeting US, Europe, but in case of the companies that are looking at Americas, we have a distinguished position where we are very strong in Canada and also whole Latin America region. So we are present in 10 countries in Latin America besides of Canada. And this position came from the acquisition of Grupo Biotoscana that was already established in Latin America. This acquisition made by Knight Therapeutics was completed last year in September. But Knight Therapeutics already has a great history because it came from, it's a spin out of Paladin Labs. That was one of the success case in North America and Canada, where the company was developed from the scratch and then was sold to Paladin Labs for more than $3 billion US. So it's really a success case that provided to the investors or to the founders of Knight Therapeutics a lot of opportunities and cash to deploy this strategy. So the company started with some acquisitions of assets, products in Canada, and then some other assets in Latin America and the Biotoscana company, as I mentioned. And now the company is very well positioned in this region, and especially when we are talking about biosimilars, biobetters. In most of the cases, I think that will be more geo or regional deals instead of a global deals because of the specificity that we have in countries in the region. So I think that we are really, a good option for this companies that are the developers of these biosimilars, biobetters, bionovels, and we have the full package. For these partners, we have commercial structure, very strong market access, regulatory, medical affairs, so we can properly deploy the products throughout the region. In terms of the strategies, looking at our position, we have been discussing really interesting situations. We have some products that are, exactly as the originator, and they are positioned as biosimilars. And obviously, in this case, you need to be the first to enter. You need to be the first, the second, and this is really important. We all know that. But we also have some companies that are, as Shayoli mentioned, that we have companies applying some innovation over the products and delivering what we can call biobetters. But it's really tricky because we have been discussing with some companies that they have those options, this type of options with biobetters, but the differentiation needs to be really meaningful to be attractive. Otherwise, if you are not a biosimilar and you have a differentiation that is not good enough, it's better to have a biosimilar because it's going to be easier to discuss with the payers and to get the registration. So it's quite complex to take this decision because trying to put myself in the shoes of the developers, they can choose the pathway to develop a bio better, but they need to have in mind that this differentiation that they will provide will be captured properly in a clinical trial and will really provide a benefit to the patients, to the payers, to the system in general. So I think that we have a lot of things to discuss during the panel, and I will be pleased to discuss and go into details about the possibilities. But I think that it's a really good moment or timing to define strategies and see what we can do better. So exciting times. Turning back to you, Debra.
Thanks, Stefan. Thank you so much. So just turning the mic back to you, Shaoli and Bert. Now, Stefani has talked about the need for differentiation, to need to show something different and better to the regulators. So how are you thinking about, in your context, about your pipeline and the next stage of molecules you are bringing in terms of addressing these needs from the bio side?
I think, I mean, I guess, when you think about the extremes of being totally innovative, totally novel versus a biosimilar, there's different gradients across those 2 points. And so, Biothera does have some bio betters where we have taken known mAbs and engineered them to be have enhanced ADCC effect, for example. That's something my research group loves, and so they're very intrigued by it. And we have a number of assets where we've explored that technology, and so they're technically bio betters, and have the potential to have a better efficacy profile. And so we are looking at those type of opportunities. At the same time, what we're learning in the biosimilar space is that some of our partners are, looking to find ways to tweak our biosimilars to differentiate them from other biosimilars that are out there and from the originator. And so whether that looks like a slightly different device, if that looks like a new device, if it's a difference in one of the ones that's come up across the number of different conversations is providing, if it comes in a vial, say, to providing a different volume in the vial, that seems to have, for the end users, depending on the drug that you're talking about, the way the originator provides it and isn't necessarily the most efficient for what the end users, the doctors are in the hospitals are looking for. And so there seems to be some effort to, come up with different concentration vials to be able to provide, the end users with a product that's more same product, same exact, it's a biosimilar, but in a way that's more usable for the facilities and the doctors. And so things like that are starting to crop up in conversations over the last 6 months or so that, if you went back and asked me 2 years ago, I never came up as part of our conversations with partners. And so people are, there's still always a desire to figure out how to differentiate not only, into the bio better space where you do need new clinical studies, like Stefani was saying, but also in the biosimilar space where it's more of a regulator question, which I'll be the first to admit I don't completely appreciate because I haven't been to the finish line yet with it. But the companies are really looking for ways to, if 5 Humiras come to the market on the same day in Europe, how do you differentiate beyond price? And no one wants to differentiate on price if they don't have to. So everybody's really looking for ways to tweak the products just enough to stay biosimilars, but also just enough to say, hey, to the payers and the providers, we've got a better product than those guys who are exactly the same at us that are sitting next to us. And it's very intriguing. I'll be the first to admit I'm still trying to get my hands around it and truly understand it. And maybe in a year I'll have a better, be able to give more details as we work through some of these things with what partners we hope to have on board by then. But it's been a really interesting twist in the conversations that I don't think Biothera really expected and wasn't really planning for. So now it's something new as we go through these conversations. We've got to be thinking, how do we start thinking about this ahead of time, and what would be the most logical way to try to do that, but cost effective way. And hopefully, if we're successful at doing that, that just makes us look like even a better potential partner for some of these larger companies. But I'll defer back to the group and other opinions.
Thanks, Bert. Shaoli, over to you.
Yeah, so I was actually more listening, because I think Bart has come up with very many good points that internally we have also been discussing, how to make this biosimilar in a better way. One thing, of course, is to reduce the COGS. The other one is to make it into multiple different formulation, concentration, use different devices. I mean, these are all the things that we yet to build, because as not that large company yet, the resources that we have, and I believe all the company have, are limited. So, you need to do it one step at a time. One way that we have been looking at this, maybe it's a little bit different, is that we are trying to be, somewhere where less players are. So this is again, leveraging through our own platform technology. I mean, E. coli is definitely different when it comes to the manufacturing process, and we are aware that they're actually less in terms of the upscale, manufacturing capacities comparing with MAPS. So being able to actually get hold of all that setting, the execution of the process, that in itself is a differentiator. So we wanted to leverage that. And that was the reason why initially we have designed the pipeline into, Lucentis biosimilar, which is actually a FAB. And then our second product in the pipeline is also a FAB, so Cimzia biosimilar. And that is a very tricky product to do. We realize that. And when we go out and talk to the partners, I mean, quite often we encounter the question that, why are there nobody developing that? Why are you the only one? So then the advantage can also become a challenge, because then people started to question, how tricky that really is to actually make it happen, to deliver the final product, and why can you actually do that where most of the players don't not choose to be. I mean, I'm not going to leverage on that so much, but I think essentially it is really that we see that quite often per product, per biological product, you have around 3 to 5. That is the regular size when it comes to biosimilar player. But then, of course, at the same time, there are also products which most of the players are a little bit hesitant to go into due to different reasons. I mean, some of them are technical challenge, some of them are maybe the COGS is not fully justifying the business case, etc. But then again, I mean, from our own standpoint, the Xbrane standpoint, is that we try to be a little bit unique in terms of content of our pipeline. What do we have? So try to complement, what is on the market and what not yet. So hoping that that is something that can give a little bit of a difference, a differentiator regarding our products. So that's, so far the way how we're trying to do that. But then, of course, there's also a limitation to it, because most of the biosimilars are indeed MAPS. So, that is also one of the opportunities and maybe challenges at the same time for the future pipeline development. But we're pretty confident that we've tackled the most important key points here. So, yeah, with that, I think I'll hand it back to the moderator or Stephanie. So please, chip in from the other side of the side of the table.
Yeah. Thank you, Shirley. It's really interesting just to share how we look at that. When we are discussing with a company that is offering a biosimilar, or is trying to establish or evaluating a collaboration, we are looking at some characteristics of this project. I mean, in terms of timing, the project is in a proper time for us to be one of the first entrants in the market. Okay, this is one point. Also, the product is in a platform that is sustainable, that has some differentiation in terms of cost, or something that we can really be confident that the production will be really productive and stable. The cost, we can expect a good position in terms of the costs of the product. So when we are looking at a biosimilar, and also obviously, if the company has some small differentiations in the product that cannot put the product out of the biosimilars route. I mean, needs to be maintained and classified as a biosimilar. For most of the markets, it can make a difference. It can make a difference because the registration pathway and also the interchangeability is going to be better. But if the company is providing something different, then I mean, a bio better, then we need to look at the differentiation that is being provided and how much it's being providing benefits to the patients, to the payers. Albert mentioned it for us to really differentiate the product in the market. And I see a lot of similarities with the development of incremental innovation, even in the synthetic space, because it always starts with an evaluation of the unmet medical needs. If you identify something that can really provide a benefit to the patients, to the physicians, to the payers, you should pursue that independently of the legislation or regulation that you're going to face at the end, or when you are trying to cross the finish line. Because if you have something meaningful, you should pursue that. Obviously, there are a lot of risks involved that you cannot effectively prove that in a clinical trial. But I can see a lot of companies that are partnering with some universities, some R&D teams, and they can develop a platform that can provide differentiation to one of their projects. But after that, they can use the same platform to deliver differentiation to other projects that they are working on. So I see that there are basically two types of companies: the ones that are trying to do as minimum as possible to register the product with the comparability and doing the minimum to be obviously fast and effective, and the other companies that are trying to aggregate something, do something close to a bio better. And also there are two types of companies in the sense of there are companies that are willing to develop additional clinical trials, phase 3 clinical trials in Europe, in US, in well-regulated markets, and there are other companies that are trying to avoid that. So in the perspective of a licensee, we are our preference is for the companies that are willing to do additional trials with the product, additional clinical trials. And our position is to support this, is to pay for additional clinical trials in the region that we are covering and support this development.
You brought up the question of expensive phase 3 trials. Stephanie's saying he's willing to fund part of it.
Yeah, that's I will say that's an unusual position. That definitely differentiates them as a prospective partner from our side. But even you know, I think generally across the board, whether it's large MNC down to small company, that most folks that are looking to in-license assets to commercialize in their territory preferentially would love you to finish the clinical studies on your own and provide them with the dossier. That's just what we've seen typically. Now, in some of our discussions to extend, you know, in some of the larger discussions where we might be lacking some data, some of the larger companies seem to be willing to work with you post-deal to make sure that you don't have any missing markets that require patient data outside of a FDA EMA approval to make sure the most value from the product is achieved. But even in our discussions with larger companies, most are looking to come on after that phase 3 is done. And maybe that's a reflection on our willingness to do it. And maybe that means we should try a little different strategy, but we don't want our, so the worst, I mean, I guess the worst case scenario from our perspective is take an asset through phase 1, look for someone to pick it up and do the phase 3 for you, and then never find that partner. Then you've just wasted a lot of time and resources to get to a product that doesn't help anybody. So we really only go into, these efforts with the idea that we're going to take it through to the finish line. If we're open to co-developing with folks and would be happy to do that, but we just don't find that conversation coming up very often. But maybe I've been unlucky. I don't know. Maybe I need to start going and talking to Stephanie more.
Now, obviously, just a quick comment. Obviously, that I've been influenced by the region because Latin America is also very open to incremental innovation. Historically speaking, if you look at the products, new combinations, new technologies included on existing molecules, Latin America pays for that, and it's different. It's not the same in all countries, so it's specific as well in this sense.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie and Bert. Very interesting point. So, Shauli, coming back to you, what are your thoughts on co-development versus complete out-licensing, pros and cons? What has been your experience in that realm?
That's actually a really big question, co-development versus out-licensing. I think one thing that I share the view with Bert is that, as a biosimilar developer, no matter which target we choose to develop as a product, we are always ready to go all the way to the finish line, meaning that no matter we're looking for, co-development partners or the out-licensing partner, we're actually, willing to take the activity, to take all the development processes all the way to a market approval. I would say that it might be a product, product by product basis, and then it also depends on what are the territory geography that we're talking about. Are we talking about the global deal, which is pretty rare for the biosimilar space, or are we talking about concentrated regional deals, EU or US or major other territories? So for us, the reason why we're interested in co-development is not because we wanted to toss out the activities to the partner. It's actually the other reason that we wanted to bring people who have expertise, teams that have hands-on expertise in certain development processes. Let's say experience in regulatory filing, experience in clinical, phase 3 biosimilar trial design, and all that. Choosing what is the best indication to go for, and all this, or maybe it's a full large-scale manufacturing that they're the only one who has the capacity. So that was the main reason. And then, of course, the co-financing structure would also add a lot of merit in terms of injecting capital to the pipeline, and eventually we cross the finish line much faster and in a more efficient way. So that's our thinking. I mean, essentially, it's a little bit difficult really to compare co-development, out-licensing. I mean, for a company that, as long as you're not a global big player, I think the resources prioritization is definitely really one of the concerns when it comes to out-licensing. So there are also certain consideration when we have more than 2, 3, or 5 products in our pipeline. There will be a certain prioritization. We wanted to, move on with 3 of them, and at the same time, probably fully out-licensing the activity of the other 2 to the partner. But then, no matter which type, I think the character or the capability and capacity of the prospective partners, not only regarding financing, but also regarding development capacity, that's also really, is something that we would take into consideration when we talk to the potential partners. So that's my input regarding this topic.
Thank you, Shauli. Well, I see we had a raised hand from Gopal. Gopal, you are here. You can unmute yourself and please let us know your question or comment.
No, I really, I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, no, I was really impressed by all the points that were being laid out very nicely. And I think, a lot of partnering discussions, what Bert mentioned very clearly, that a lot of companies definitely want to partner when they are in phase 3 or completion of phase 3. But I think, Debraj, you guys have been lucky with, partnering for a global deal right from the beginning. I think that's the other perspective. But I just wanted to add a comment that it's nice to see that both the sides are working towards getting the product into the market, irrespective of, when I say both sides, I mean the buyer side as well as the partnering side. But what do you all feel of the due diligence process itself? I think Bert did mention a little bit about how long it is. But I want to hear from Stephanie, what is the company's thought process when it comes to partnering? Is it like past experience? Is it like, do you look at what's coming up in the future, the pipeline? Maybe if I do one deal, I can get a basket from them. So what are you looking at? That's what I wanted to just discuss,
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for the question. I mean, when we are looking the first layer, as you mentioned, at the past experiences or the past deals, the history of this company in terms of deals, what the company delivered in the past. And also, as I mentioned, we are looking at looking if the company provided additional clinical data in very well-regulated market. I think this is critical for us to decide at first sight, I mean, the beginning. But then obviously we need to understand better the capabilities in terms of the platform, the manufacturing sites, and everything else. Obviously, we are in a challenging moment for that due to COVID situation and everything else. So it's quite complex to do that. But I would say that right now, considering the situation, basically the experience or the recent deals that this company had, the deliverables, and the clinical aspects, the clinical data in well-regulated markets.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
So if I may jump in, so building on the same question, actually, that's also what we were wondering internally, because essentially the due diligence from the buyer side is actually a process of understanding the risk of the asset and, setting the deal structure in a way that you properly de-risk it. So the stage of the asset should be very closely connected to the risk that you're actually facing. And this is something, I see it differently between the innovative drug and the biosimilar, because the risk profile is different and the stage at which the asset is at, you have very different risk profiles. So I think my question is really that from the biosimilar, buyer side, what are the stage where the asset is you see possesses the highest risk? Let's say, is it process development? Is it the biocompatibility, test, or what is that? Or is it later stage clinical development that is actually a risk here?
I think your point is really good, because depends on the questions that you have, you're gonna obviously create a different plan for the due diligence. In case of a BioBetter, obviously in the clinical aspects. In case of the biosimilar, mostly in the production and the capability to do that, because initially for a biosimilar, the clinical aspects are fully defined. It's just a matter to have just additional data that we can rely on to discuss with the agencies and get the registration. basically. But I would say that it's key to understand if the platform is sustainable, it's cost effective, uh, but maybe it's a bias from our company, but we are always looking at some clinical data. It's really important to as a piece of the due diligence process.
Right. Thanks a lot.
I see a question in the chat window. So there is a question from Baha Yusuf, which is for Middle East and African market, we are developing a strategy to participate on completion of phase 3 by financing it through hiring patients arm in our region in return to have rights into the region. Do you think this is an attractive strategy for the developers? Bert, you want to take that?
Sure. Um, so so on the surface, I mean, I guess the devil's always in the details, and it's a question of what sort of level of participation in, you know, funding the phase 3 does that incur, and how does that compare to the value of the region that you're talking about? And you know, that's just the first sort of, you know, I think visceral response, but then, you know, it gets a little more complicated in that, and to some degree with company politics. So I think the challenge that I think anyone in my position that's, you know, working for a company trying to be a global biosimilar developer, uh, you know, your stakeholders are looking for the biggest, you know, deal possible. So that magical global deal is always the preferred partnership for your stakeholders, be it your boss, your board of directors, et cetera, because they look at, you know, Biothera is still a small company, and I think we're building a brand in the biosimilar space, but we're still relatively new. And so from a board of directors perspective, having an MNC partnership is a validation of the company. It's telling the investment community that's either done it privately or now as a public company that we are exactly who we told you we were. We're going to be a world-class global business, you know, biosimilar developer, and we're substantiating it through this partnership with MNCA and MNCB, et cetera. And so, you know, there are pressures to find those type of partnerships. And so if you carve out a piece early, then it can, you know, sometimes with some companies make it more challenging to get those larger partnerships, particularly if particular, you know, emerging market territories are of real priority to those companies. And you don't always get the privilege of knowing that until you get into the conversations and which ones are more important. And sometimes there are surprises. And so it's actually it sounds like a really simple question, and yet it actually becomes rather complex with all the various stakeholders as the business development person that you're dealing with, and how do you manage that? That said, I think, you know, in the long run, as we become more established, are generating revenue from our products, et cetera, I think more and more the type of interaction that, you know, Baha was querying about probably becomes more interesting to us, because it's one way to de-risk the project for us to some small degree, and also probably provides us more value in what we get from the region, you know, because the reality is that a global deal is driven by the US market, to some lesser degrees by Europe, Japan, and now more and more China, and then everything else falls in line beyond that. And so, you know, you give up something to get those global partnerships. And a lot of that is value outside of those major markets. And so I could see for Biothera in the future, as we become more established and we've, you know, we're further down into our pipeline, where that type of relationship becomes more and more attractive, and maybe easier to sell to our internal stakeholders, because, you know, we're not trying to tell the investment community we're a world-class biosimilar developer, we're now accepted as that. And so that gives us more latitude to be more creative in those types of partnerships and hopefully bringing more value back to the company, in the long run. But it's a simple idea, and I like the idea personally. I think it's very attractive, but there are always challenges with, the various stakeholders you have to deal with.
Sorry, Deborah, but just a quick comment on that. I think that Bert touched a really important point. These deals cannot limit the options of the providers. So if this type of collaboration it's in opposite, is providing additional leverage to the company, I think it makes sense, but it cannot provide limitations to global multinational deals. I think this is the point. Depending on the stage of development, additional data generated from Canada or from Brazil would collaborate to the product to be more attractive to US and Europe. But it depends on the stage of development, and you can also decide for different strategies depending on the project, obviously, yeah.
And I'll just jump on that and say that I think what, today would make it more interesting is to have that sort of relationship in countries that are going to require patient data from their own citizens as part of the regulatory package, because eventually you got to figure out how to go get that. And if that's not part of your original clinical development plan, then you've got an additional trial to leverage that market. But it may not always be the country that your clinical team is actually thinking about when they're designing their clinical study, because they're sort of thinking, they're looking through a different lens. So for, China, obviously we take care of it because we're a Chinese company, but China requires a fair number of Chinese patients to be part of the patient cohort for any trials. Russia's sort of the same way, not quite as extreme as China, but still requires, Russian patients. And there are some other countries that also do too. And so, this type of partnership would look more attractive if it's not only some financing, but also help with that patient recruitment to make sure that you've got a clinical package after your hopefully one big phase 3 global study that has no problems with any regulators around the world. That certainly would be more attractive.
And the other thing that I wanted to jump in is that timing also plays a role in terms of planning all the patient, subpopulation group into one big global trial without delaying that global trial itself, because different regulatory agency, they need different lengths of time in terms of interaction. We ourselves, we have learned that lesson probably, in a little bit of a hard way. But so there's a balance there that you wanted to include as many subpopulations as possible in order to facilitate the filing or covering the whole global territory. But at the same time, timing is really key. You don't want it to delay your trial by 1 or 2 years just because you want to include that group of population there. So it's essentially it's a balance there. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. That's just the getting down into the challenges. There are just a lot of challenges there, and that's a great one because regulatory agencies work at different speeds, and you unfortunately have no control over that output.
True. Yeah. So probably planning everything well in advance, making sure that everyone can cross the finishing line at the same time, so you can start the global trial as many centers as you want. Probably that's the best way. But logistically, one really needs to plan that well in advance.
Yeah, the stage of development matters a lot in this sense, because if you have time for that, it can be very beneficial. But if you don't, obviously it's not going to provide additional benefits.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, thank you. That has been a great discussion, and that brings us to almost to the close of this great panel discussion.